Alright, I know this is predominantly a gaming channel and everything, but hey, it's my channel, and if I want to ramble about music for 20 minutes, then I will. 2017 brought not only some top-notch video games, but also some pretty amazing music, and I thought I'd run down my favourites. This top 30 is going to need to be a little more rapid fire than my gaming 10, so I've limited myself to 2 or 3 sentences per entry. Obviously I can't play their music in this video for copyright reasons, but I'll include links in the description if you want to check out any of these albums. Right, let's get started, shall we?
Number 30.
Starting us off at 30, we've got Elder's third, I think, album, Reflections of a Dying World. These guys are, in my humble opinion, one of the best sounding groups in the stoner scene these days, rocking as they do some really slick, Caius-esque grooves and thick, ponderous tones. They bring a lot of musicianship to the table, which is nice to see in a genre which usually focuses on evolving a single riff for 8 minutes. They weave these really sinuous, psychedelic guitar solos around and about the weighty riffing, and these guys are a band who have their niche and they fill it out. They might not deviate much from album to album, but when your spacey vibes and catchy riffs ain't broke, then why fix them?
Number 29.
Next up is, goddamn, I'm never going to pronounce this right, Wasu Tempet? Wasu Tempet. Their latest album, Alan. I discovered these guys through their 2015 album Utopia, and I'm consistently impressed with their output. While a lot of third-wave post-rock has become increasingly cliché, these guys break the mould by bringing us back to the sort of thing Swans and Godspeed were doing in the 90s. Yeah, the big instrumental climaxes are all present and correct, but there's ambient passages, there's drone and there's noise influences, there's spoken word and sound collages. They really try to take post-rock and take it to a place that is post-rock, you know. This album is a little more reserved than their uncompromising sophomore release, but it still pushes the boundaries nicely in a way that is as pleasant to listen to as it is creative.
Number 28.
Boris's Deer is, well, it's more Boris. These guys have been around a long time and have put out so much music in so many different styles that it's hard to keep track. This one takes them back to their roots somewhat, reminding me heavily of the unflinching drone doom of amplifier worship in Akuma no Uta, sitting somewhere on the border of the more accessible rock stuff and their sprawling hour-long soundscapes. This sort of stuff is all about the tone and about the claustrophobic feeling of being steadily crushed to death by the sheer immensity of the music. And when I'm in the mood for that sort of thing, I can honestly say that this album delivers. It's absolutely not for everyone, but Boris have a lot of practice in this field, and if you want to dip your toe into those waters, then this is a great starting point.
Number 27.
Number 27 is the latest release by BySix. While it didn't quite live up to the ungodly hype I experienced following their amazing comeback EP, Opacities, this record was still a solid return to form from one of the groups who broke so much new ground in the metalcore scene in the early 2000s. This album is schizophrenic in the purest sense of the word. The guitars are tight and complex, the vocals are completely unhinged, and have this really compelling back and forth quality to them. The production is bold and clean and in your face. These guys still sound as fresh as they did 15 years ago, and it is really great to have them back.
Number 26.
For a long time, Daleks had basically cornered the market on the whole dark, noisy, primal hip-hop scene, and while other bands have popped up in recent years to take the torch, Daleks seem kind of reluctant to let it go. These guys are still making some of the most intense, brooding music in the genre, and while their MC may not be my favourite rapper lyrically, he delivers a really powerful performance which complements the seething brutishness of the music perfectly. This release was actually my favourite of theirs for a while, and lives up to all expectations, delivering a tasty slice of unflinching political trip-hop.
Number 25.
See, I'm not a hipster, I have a Foo Fighters album in my list. While I'm a big Nirvana fan, and have enjoyed the Foo's early work, I don't think they've done anything worth a mention in years, so it was a pleasant surprise to finally get around to giving this a listen and discover that, hey, it's actually good. There's some real Beatles influence in here, some nice vocal harmonies and bombastic guitar work, but then suddenly the album will hit you with a surprisingly raw track like Run, or a hazy wall of sound like the title track, and it's like, you know what, these guys have still got it. More like this and less like the last 15 years of your discography, please, Mr. Grohl.
Number 24.
One of the many many Neurosis side projects out there, Harvestman somewhat sporadically releases easy-on-the-ear ambient drone tracks, dripping with psychedelic fuzz and drawing heavy influences from traditional folk music. The discography is something of a mixed bag in terms of listenability, but is rarely outright abrasive and more often than not delivers a heady, thick atmosphere that makes for a pleasant enough listening experience. This year's album is the best of the bunch, mixing hypnotic drones and thick beats with screeching guitars for a surprisingly gripping sound, or at least so far as ambient music can ever be described as gripping.
Number 23.
Swampus are a rock band's rock band. This might be their debut, but it sounds like the output of a group who have been at it for decades. There's a distinct grunginess to their music, a raw, heavy sound which could fit in comfortably alongside Mudhoney or Tad, and there's also a subtle technicality here. Most of the tracks are driven along by some intricate rhythm work, while the guitar lead flits across multiple different tones and styles throughout the 3 to 4 minute duration of the tracks. With some slightly more professional production behind them, this band could really be going places.
Number 22.
I'll be honest, I usually prefer frontman Will Wagner's more intimate solo work to the rowdy pop punk of his band, but this time around they ramped everything up a notch and made such an immediate, bombastic record that it's hard to hate it. This record shows real progress too. Behind Wagner's slurred Australian ranting, there's post-punk and shoegaze ideas at play, which help to break up the relentlessly bouncy Green Day-esque power chord bangers. This feels both more fun and more well written than the band's earlier work, but remains just as personal and powerful.
Number 21.
Solstafir are a band who evolve with every album, shedding their old skin in favour of one that fits them better at the moment. The latest release is a largely downbeat, haunting affair with pained vocals ringing over sparse, noisy guitars. The album has an unexpected synth-pop style to it, a certain Depeche Mode flavouring which inexplicably complements the lingering post-metal elements through the musical fusion that practically no other band could have made work. This album is beautiful and sinister in equal amounts, and still manages to be weirdly accessible. I just wish I could speak Icelandic.
Number 20.
This came as a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting a follow-up to Ginger Wildheart's 2013 new metal/grindcore/industrial/noise project to ever come, but here it is, and it's even more insane than the first two releases. This album is uncompromising. Its layers of unintelligible vocals, its concussive stampeding drums, it's so many different guitar effects at once that it's impossible to distinguish individual notes amongst the sea of deafening noise. And yet it's Ginger Wildheart and he's incapable of writing anything that isn't catchy, so somehow it works. God damn, it is some intense listening though.
Number 19.
Oh hey, Godspeed is still going. That's the response I have whenever I hear that these guys have dropped a new record. I still think of them as these classic icons of post-rock, and the fact that they have reformed and have now put out 3 new era albums just somehow seems weird. While I doubt that they'll ever write another F-sharp A-sharp Infinity or Skinny Fists, the new music is still far more creative and exciting than pretty much any of their contemporaries, and their uncanny orchestral sound is just as powerful today as it ever was. It might just be another Godspeed album, but on the plus side, it's just another Godspeed album.
Number 18.
I'll admit it, I was late to the nod party. This album was my very first experience with them, and goddamn I regret not getting into them sooner. These guys are one of the few remaining ultra-political noise rock bands, keeping alive the raw, anarchistic sound of Big Black and The Fall, and playing it fucking loud. This music is dark, it's primal, it's incredibly angry, and it takes no prisoners. The meaty post-punk riffs which dominate the tracks are garnished with electronic loops and wailing guitar solos, ensuring that we have as much sound packed into our ears as possible at all times. Nod are simultaneously the band we need and the one we deserve, and take from that what you will.
Number 17.
I'll admit I'm a prog head at heart, but depressingly I find a lot of modern prog to be so damn samey. Van Gogh surprised me then when they put out a prog metal album that didn't have me cringing and counting down the minutes. The frontman has a powerful voice but refrains from the flowery operatics of other names in the genre. The riffs prefer to focus on the groove and on distinguishing themselves over being technical for technicality's sake. The songs are dynamic and are always pleasantly surprising with the direction. Honestly, these guys are a breath of fresh air for a dying genre, and if you're a prog fan, you should absolutely check them out.
Number 16.
Oh look, another ex-Wildheart. I'm a fan, alright? I'm sorry. Honestly, CJ has always taken a back seat to the more well-known Ginger, but if you compare their solo material, it's obvious which of the two had the bigger input on the classic releases. Blood is an album of catchy punk riffing, addictive vocal hooks, and almost obnoxiously British colloquialism. In short, it could be a new Wild Hearts release, and while I've enjoyed most of what Ginger has been doing since the band's dissolution, it's so gratifying to have new material in the style that I grew up with.
Number 15.
Open parenthesis, waning close parenthesis, are a band unafraid to run the whole spectrum of post-rock and post-metal, often in one song. The opening track on here flows seamlessly from huge heavy riffs, roaring vocals and blast beats to synth-led Floydian musing, and then back again like a swelling tide. The combination of male and female vocals give the band the freedom to complement the music no matter what's happening, whether it's a low-key ambient intro, an intense black metal passage, or an explosive post-rock climax. This album will always keep you guessing, without ever becoming thematically inappropriate, a delicate balance which few bands can get right.
Number 14.
You know, I wanted to put this lower. Ever since The Hunter, I feel like Mastodon's music doesn't quite appeal to me the way it once did. I fell in love with the monolithic guitars and spacey vibes of Crack the Sky and Blood Mountain, and the more stripped-down radio-friendly sound of their later material just isn't the same. And yet, it's still great music in its own right. I listened to this album again, doing my best to keep from making comparisons to their early work, and honestly, I had a great time. The musicianship is still tight, the riffs are still compelling, the continuous baton passing of the vocals still makes every section sound dynamically distinct. Mastodon are making the music they want to make, and it still sounds really good, so fuck it, it deserves to be in the top 20.
Number 13.
Oh look, it's the Token Pop album. I was never really able to get into Uncle's earlier material, but this one, for all its glossiness and cleanness and radio-friendly balladry, was honestly just a really nice piece of music. Most of the tunes on here are simple, designed to enhance the performances of the various guest vocalists rather than one-up them, and it all just works. It's sweet, it's a little maudlin, the heavy use of piano and strings gives it this dynamic orchestral feel which provides the tunes with more weight than synths alone could ever have managed. The album is just so listenable, and it's a pleasure every time.
Number 12.
When Gone Is Gone put out their first record back in 2016, I was a little disappointed. For such an all-star lineup, I was expecting more than just the forgettable stoner rock that we ended up with, but then barely 6 months later, they dropped Echolocation and all was forgiven. Yes, the stoner vibe is still present on here, but there's so much more going on. At times it sounds like the best moments of modern Mastodon, while at others it dabbles in prog rock, ambient music, and even trip-hop. The gloriously weird backmasked cover of Portishead's Roads was an unexpected surprise, and elsewhere you've got everything from beer-guzzling hard rock to low-key spacey balladry. This might only be a side project for these musicians, but after this album, I really hope we get more of it.
Number 11.
The Oken Arts have a weird sound. The barking vocals and punchy aggressive guitars scream punk rock, but the technicality and song structure argues prog metal. Whatever they are, they're cool. This album is basically non-stop high-octane stuff. The bass and drums in particular tend to be pretty relentless in their war on your ears, and the vocals, though often pretty raw, provide a certain degree of energetic fun to the proceedings. Honestly, a lot of this music is danceable as hell, like Green Day by way of Opeth. And even I have no idea what I mean by that.
Number 10.
Oh look, the top 10. This is where all the really good shit lives. First, the long-awaited follow-up to Xanthocroid's 2012 debut. Honestly, I think they outdid themselves with this one. While the band's black metal roots are evident, the music on this album is more akin to a symphonic film score, a majestic sprawling beast full of dynamic twists and turns, orchestral flourishes, and dramatic choral passages, which help to elevate this above and beyond being just another pretentious metal album. There's so much going on here that it's impossible to sum it up in a couple of sentences, but if you're a fan of complex, powerful music, then you should absolutely give this one a listen.
Number 9.
Although I've been a fan of Hotel Books for a few years now, I honestly found their last couple of releases to be retreading old ground. This time around though, they've brought in guest vocalists and utilised a much more melodic approach, full of earworm choruses to complement the spoken word tirades which normally dominate these snappy post-punk style tunes. These hooks add a much needed replayability to proceedings, not so much dumbing down the band's signature passionate sound as helping it to grow from a interesting novelty into a serious musical production.
Number 8.
This album is a masterclass in texture and sound manipulation. Though a spacey prog rock release on the surface, the album utilises so many layers of guitar effects and electronic noise that it develops into something very unique and very intriguing. Add into that the multitude of vocal techniques and voices, and a dynamic range which touches on everything from metal to soul, ambient drone and something approaching hip-hop, and you've got a mixed bag of an album which really shouldn't work but really, really does.
Number 7.
One of the best groups out there when it comes to taking a truly weird idea and crafting it into something listenable, Oxbow have slowly morphed over the years from abrasive noise rock group into something completely undefinable. Across this album, their first in 10 years, they touch on jazz, on blues, on punk rock and folk and on 100 other genres without really ever tying themselves down, tying it all together with cunningly placed horns and guitars and the omnipresent unhinged vocals which will either give you chills or have you throwing your headphones off in disgust, with absolutely no middle ground.
Number 6.
Pain of Salvation have been my favourite prog band in the world for the longest time. Their unique blend of passion and technicality really helps them to stand out in a scene of generally cold, sterile music. I've always admired their attempts to branch out into new styles with every album, so while this return to their classic sound wasn't unwelcome, it did feel a little bit counterproductive. And that's about all the criticism I can level here. This is another album of finely crafted, off-kilter rock music with stellar vocals and unforgettable musicianship, and if a couple of tracks seemed a little like a rehash, then that's just fine. A weaker POS album is still a damn good album by anyone else's standards.
Number 5.
Sitting somewhere on the border of post-metal and alt-rock, Where Your Wounds provides an intense, evocative hour of music which is in turns monolithic, despondent, heartfelt and hypnotic. While I was never a fan of Jacob Bannon's flagship band Converge, I find his world-weary vocals really suit this type of crushing music, and he absolutely pours his soul into every performance. As much as I enjoy the more intense moments on here, it's the slower, more introspective sections that see Bannon backed only by piano or a steady drum beat that really make this album shine.
Number 4.
So I'll be honest, I had no interest in the music of Little Ugly Mane, seeing only the intentionally awful album art and the SoundCloud rapper moniker and refusing to give him a chance. And then I got tricked into listening to this album, released under the pseudonym Bedwetter, and I realised what I'd been missing out on. This guy at his tamest is more raw and intense than most other rappers can ever manage. And then there's tracks like Haze of Interference, where this guy sounds like he's either about to burst into tears or rip someone's head off. Mix this sort of tightly wound ferocity in with some trippy off-kilter beats, and the end product is one of the most vital listens you'll have this year.
Number 3.
While I've been following Fen closely since the release of Dustwalker back in 2012, I feel like only now have they really found their stride. With Winter, they built their sprawling black metal meets post-rock sound into a single hour plus of music which winds its way into largely unexplored territory. Symphonic black metal is nothing new, but the sheer scale of this monster means that it needs to keep building on itself, introducing new elements and performing dramatic tonal shifts, each of which is more breathtaking than the last. I really can't do this album justice with my limited musical knowledge, but if you like music which is as pretty as it is aggressive, then this is a must-hear.
Number 2.
My top 3 spots were close, but Idles out-inched Fen by virtue of just being so damn infectious. The snarling post-punk anthems on offer here are not only scathingly vicious and immensely catchy, but also utilise some of the meatiest guitar tones I've ever heard. The lyrics are hilarious and poignant by turns, and the rhythm section sounds like a bag of bowling balls falling down the stairs, and I mean that in a good way. Essentially, the title of this album sums it up far better and more succinctly than I ever could. Punk might be dead, but these guys are parading its corpse pretty damn convincingly.
Number 1.
He's done it. Nerdy art rapper Open Mike Eagle has finally topped his debut by expanding on the heady psychedelic sounds of his last few releases with a personal concept about growing up and the destruction of his childhood home. These beats are dense and would honestly be perfectly enjoyable as instrumentals, but Mike's honey-drenched vocals slide across them in a ludicrously complimentary manner. Very few rappers out there could deliver lines with the same smooth inflection as Open Mike, and even less could make his esoteric beats and weird metaphors work to further a simple, honest concept. I'm no hip-hop expert, and I don't pretend to be, but in my humble opinion, Open Mike Eagle is pretty damn near untouchable right now. And that's my list. Once again, I'm sorry if I missed one of your favourites. Maybe I haven't heard it, or maybe it just sucks and you're too much of a plebeian to understand it. Now, right, kid, it's all down to personal taste at the end of the day, and this list was just mine. Anyway, I'm going to disappear for a couple of weeks now, but I'll be back in 2018 with some more Let's Plays for no one to watch. To anyone seeing this, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. God knows I'll try to. Joe out.